Hey folks, my name is Jeremy Henniger and I'm the Director of Statewide Assessment at the Nebraska Department of Education. Today, we're going to cover some reminders about interpreting and using results from the NSCAS Growth Winter Pilot. We'll also answer some common questions and provide additional details. One note on the presentation today, we're doing it in one take, no editing. So if I have any flubs, hopefully you can just bear with me. So here we go. We're going to start with some general reminders about the NSCAS Growth Winter Pilot. The pilot utilized an innovative hybrid approach to assess students in grades 3 through 8 in both ELA and mathematics. The new model prioritizes grade level content, but still allows adaptation below and beyond grade level. The pilot also utilized a more robust and intuitive testing platform. A new responsive reporting suite quickly delivered results to educators. NDE identified a representative sample of students for each grade and content level with students from across the state. 651 schools and 215 of Nebraska's districts took part in the pilot that successfully delivered more than 135,000 tests. NSCAS Growth's innovative design allowed NDE and NWA to provide linked RIT scores and related national percentiles, much like MAP Growth. Additionally, educators were provided enhanced grade level information and scores based on Nebraska's cut scores and achievement levels. These ELA and math scores are currently based on the existing assessment blueprints. Unlike the RIT scores, which were based on winter norms, NSCAS scale scores and achievement level information is based on spring or end of the year expectations. A couple of reminders for you and your colleagues as you interpret data from the NSCAS Growth Winter Pilot. First, the winter administration for NSCAS Growth is a pilot, and we should keep that in mind as we examine the data. Assessment pilots are used to gather, analyze, and ensure assessments function as designed. We were checking all the parts of the assessment from the technology to the items and scores, all the while trying to ensure reliability. This means that we are confident in the methods and the calculations used in the design and the scoring of NSCAS Growth Winter Pilot. But we're also continuing and will continue in the future to conduct extensive analyses from the data gathered during the Winter Pilot in an effort to improve the precision and usefulness of those results. While most pilot administrations do not provide reports, the NSCAS Growth Winter Pilot included preliminary reports to, one, provide some continuity of MAP growth data during the winter, and to, two, gather feedback on all the NSCAS Growth report designs. Thanks for everybody that provided feedback. NSCAS Growth scores and MAP Growth RIT scores serve different purposes. NSCAS Growth is a measure of student performance relative to end of the year expectations defined by summative achievement level descriptors, and those are written by Nebraska educators. The normative RIT score and resulting achievement percentile is a measure of student progress along the MAP Growth developmental scale, which is not grade specific. Since there are differences in purpose and design, NSCAS Growth uses a subset of items to determine the NSCAS scale score and achievement levels, while the estimated RIT is generally calculated using all of the items. Thus, two students might have similar scores for RIT, but see differences in the NSCAS scale scores, or vice versa. As always, individual students may vary from administration to administration due to all types of variables that impact student learning and achievement. It is always important to consider all the context when interpreting data, whether that data is for individual students or classrooms or entire districts. As with any assessment, results should be considered in light of what the student has had the opportunity to learn. One of the new and unique features of NSCAS Growth reports will be the inclusion of item and standard specific student performance, so that student performance can be considered against what standards have been covered in instruction. This can help inform instructional reviews and planning, or to address specific strengths or needs of students. In other words, results should be considered very differently if a student has already had the opportunity to learn, or if a district scope and sequence has that content scheduled for later in the year. NWA and NDE will continue to analyze and make sure the results are reliable and useful for their intended purposes. Because this administration is a pilot, NDE recommends caution in interpreting the results. As with any assessment results, key decisions should be informed using multiple sources of data. As the first administration for Nebraska's three-year model, we are and will continue to conduct multiple studies, making any adjustments necessary to ensure that even better precision and even more useful results are available moving forward. Nebraska classroom teachers will continue to play important roles in the development of our statewide assessment. Here are just some of the many ways that Nebraska educators have been involved, from writing and revising content area standards to composing and revising NSCAS items based or aligned to those standards, reviewing those items for bias and sensitivity issues, authoring and reviewing achievement level descriptors, recommending cut scores for each achievement level, providing feedback on all aspects of the statewide assessment program, and then also advising the NDE statewide assessment office on policy and procedures related to the assessment program. Thanks to all the educators that have and or will put in extra time and energy for the development of this innovative program. So now we're going to get into some of the specific questions and responses for those. So question, we've observed students getting lower RIT scores and associated percentiles than they have in the past. Why? Are the NSCAS Growth RIT scores reliable and valid? Well, the reliability or trustworthiness of a score is just as important as the validity or usefulness of that score for its intended purpose. The RIT score produced by NSCAS Growth is intended to serve the same purposes as the MAP Growth RIT, which is a measured growth. It was to measure growth on the MAP developmental scale and link to norms compared to student performance to other testing at the same point in time. The NSCAS scale, score, and performance classification, developing on track, college and career benchmark, answers a different question about where the student is relative to end of the year expectations. Both scores are useful for their intended purposes. To be able to produce RIT scores with NSCAS Growth, psychometricians conducted a linking study between NSCAS Growth and MAP Growth. The design of the study was more than just a statistical linking. NSCAS Growth assessments included MAP Growth items to ensure a very strong linking design produced reliable RIT scores. As with any new norming studies or other linked scores, particularly given all the scores have some measurement error, the new linked scores can feel different when compared to prior scores, particularly at the individual student level. The linking study results show an average NSCAS RIT scores fall within 1 to 3 points of MAP Growth RIT. Because NSCAS Growth tests have a different purpose and test design than MAP Growth, educators could see slight differences in individual student performance between the NSCAS Growth estimated RIT and the MAP Growth RIT score if tested twice in the same testing window. As always, individual students' results may vary from administration to administration due to all types of variables. As mentioned before, NDE recommends using caution interpreting and using pilot results. Next question. How can students with similar NSCAS scale scores get such different RIT estimates and associated achievement percentiles? Or vice versa, how do students with similar RIT get scores with similar RIT scores get such different NSCAS scale scores? So while the scores are linked, the purpose of and therefore the design of MAP Growth and NSCAS Growth assessments are fundamentally different. Whereas MAP Growth measures on and off grade content, NSCAS Growth is intended to measure a larger portion of on grade content relative to end of the year expectations, which results in the NSCAS Growth scale score, as well as on and off grade performance, which results in the NSCAS Growth RIT score. The NSCAS Growth scale score is based on the 27 operational items assessing the grade level blueprint or table of specifications. In most cases, the resulting RIT score factors in the student's performance on those 27 items, and on the more personalized grade agnostic part of the test, the remaining 13 items, As a result, two students may have similar NSCAS gross scale scores based on their performance on the first 27 items, but different RIT scale scores or vice versa based on all of the items. Note one exception: NSCAS growth writing skills items are not used to calculate estimated reading RIT scores because MAP growth reading does not measure writing. Thus, if a student performs very well on the NSCAS growth writing skills items, the RIT score may not reflect the same strength. Such a comparison is similar to comparing ELA scores to MAP growth reading scores in the past. We're still getting both scores. We just only have to do one administration. So next question. How does the fact that NSCAS growth uses default instructional weeks versus districts entering custom instructional weeks impact the achievement percentiles? Is it making the percentiles lower than usual? Maybe. Opportunity to learn provides important context when interpreting any student's performance. Percentile ranks are sensitive to the amount of instruction recorded. That means two students with the same RIT or even the RIT for one student could result in different percentile ranks on MAP growth and NSCAS growth when different instructional weeks are considered. The NSCAS growth winter pilot used the same default number of weeks for all Nebraska students. Therefore, there can be differences from previous year's MAP growth percentile if a district has had more or less instructional weeks than the winter default of 20 instructional weeks. So the answer is yes, differences in instructional weeks can be having slight impacts on the results generated by the pilot. Keeping those differences of instructional weeks is important context when considering the data. Next question. Students seem to need to have a very high national percentile from RIT to be on track or CCR benchmark on NSCAS growth. Why? Well, some of these differences have to do with the RIT and percentiles being based on winter norms or expectations, while NSCAS gross achievement levels determination is based on end of the year expectations. Those national percentiles are seasonal norms specific to each grade and content level. An end of the grade expectation looks very different in the spring after a year of instruction than it does in the winter or fall, and students have not had the opportunity to learn the content and skills needed to demonstrate proficiency at the end of the school year. This is why performance consistent with on track or better might be around the 60th percentile in spring, but more like the 75th percentile in winter or the 90th percentile in fall. In other words, students who already have on track in winter or fall when students have not had the opportunity to learn. Sorry. So this was why performance consistent with on track or better may be around the 60th percentile in spring, but more like the 75th percentile in winter and in the 90th percentile in the fall. In other words, students who are already on track in winter are actually more likely to be at a higher percentile compared to their same grade peers. An additional note about Nebraska's cut scores for NSCAS ELA and mathematics. Nebraska has been using the same cut scores for both content areas since we first started assessing our state adopted college and career ready standards in 2017 and 2018, respectively. These cut scores for NSCAS have always been set at a fairly high level, and students have generally needed a rather high percentile on the related MAP growth assessment to be able to score in those top two achievement levels on NSCAS. Part of this is again because the differences in assessment, both purpose and design, and what those scores indicate. MAP growth is a norm referenced assessment, and percentiles indicate at what level a student is scoring compared to peers. In a norm referenced assessment, half the students will always be below or above the 50th percentile. NSCAS is a criterion referenced assessment, which means that all students that take the test have the opportunity to score in the proficient range as long as they meet or exceed the specified level. The specified levels or cut scores were recommended by Nebraska content experts back in 2017 and 18. These content experts were largely composed of classroom teachers that made judgments about what content they expected proficient students to get right. A well-established and transparent process was used to set these cut scores. Nebraska educators will have a new opportunity to recommend updated cut scores for ELA and math in the summer of 2023. So some considerations, NDE and NWA have already conducted some early analysis based on the first half of the winter pilot results. Additionally, analyses will be conducted on the full winter pilot results, as well as for each NSCAS growth administration moving forward. What we know is that the linking evidence remains strong. Our analysis of the results from the first half of the pilot continue to confirm this. We will be conducting additional analyses with all pilot results now that it is concluded. Students in ELA and upper grades tend to score lower than expected. So that's the first indication that the maybe not quite aligned, right? The winter pilot launched with a more limited pool than what we have for spring, especially in ELA, which appears to be producing those lower scores than expected. We're investigating how the larger item pool will perform this spring and options for making next year's fall and winter tests more adaptive and responsive to individual students. Once again, it's a pilot, so we're adjusting to try to get more precision and more useful results moving forward. As always, there's evidence of variability in student engagement and effort. While this is always true, it continues to be important as we look at results, right? It's important to remember that as a pilot, attitudes of both adults and students can be different than for an assessment that counts, right? So oftentimes people associate with pilot with doesn't count, so you don't have the same effort, or teachers don't encourage students the same way. That can have an impact. The continued pandemic is likely to impact trends in student achievement. Additionally, the pandemic is likely to impact some students' ability to demonstrate what they know and can do. And in other words, trauma from the pandemic may hinder students' performance on assessments. Of course, that's true for all types of trauma. The trauma from the pandemic is potentially more prevalent than typical sources of trauma. It is also important to note that since some of the development of NSCAS growth is based on data gathered during the COVID-19 pandemic, NDE and NWA have already planned ongoing analyses to validate the calculations and results provided by NSCAS growth as we move forward. We continue to investigate further, so we're thinking about adjusting the starting values to better account for expected student ability in winter and easing students into the assessment, and that's going to change things as well. For the first time, NSCAS growth will be able to show where a student was previously and adjust the starting level for that student. Still at grade level, but at the upper or lower ranges, depending on how the student performed previously. Adjusting constraints for the fall and winter assessments that are more formative in nature than the spring summative tests. So we've talked about this. We continue to work on this. Well, it's an ongoing process, innovative, and doing what is useful for instruction is what we're all about in this new test design. Like I mentioned this a couple of times, we're continuing to do these analyses and analyze the results to continue to make it better moving forward. It's also important to note the additional support resources are under development and will be released soon. So we're working on all kinds of things to help make the NSCAS growth results useful in the same way that MAP growth has been for us for a long time. So professional learning and support resources coming. There's new resources coming out on Valentine's Day 2022. There's a new recorded webinar that's going to be available and a new tool for educators to use. Also, new training for our certified facilitator program in mid-April. So Nebraska has 72 certified facilitators all across the state in each of the ESUs and our larger districts. And those certified facilitators will then be able to pass that training, that professional learning experience on and support districts and school staffs following that. two additional resources, links on the page. NDE's NSCAS growth page has all kinds of resources on it. Those are kind of bigger picture pieces and policy pieces. And then the NSCAS portal page is the NWA's page, and that has a lot of the useful things for each administration, manuals and those types of things. Check those out. Continue to dig in more if you're interested. Finally, please let us know if you have any additional questions by contacting NDE at the email on your screen. We want to thank all the districts, schools, educators, and students that participated in the NSCAS Growth Winter Pilot and made it successful. Thank you for your time. Please let us know if you have questions. Thanks.